Welcome to Midnight Sleep Scientist, a place where curiosity moves at the speed of rest. Tonight, we leave the modern map behind and drift into a planet that feels familiar, yet softened at the edges. A Jurassic Earth, warm and sea-laced, where forests breathed resin and the evenings hummed with insects and tide. We'll wander slowly across floodplains and shallow seas, beneath pterosaurs gliding like lantern kites, past forests of conifers, cycads, and ginkgo, into nights where small mammals stitched quiet paths between roots. We'll keep one hand on the evidence, and the other open to wonder, letting the rocks speak in their careful, unhurried way. Settle your shoulders, let the jaw unclench. Perhaps feel the weight of the blanket, like ancient sand settling into layers. If you're still awake later, feel free to share where you're listening from tonight. It's always lovely to see how wide this quiet circle really is. When you're ready, we'll begin. Imagine a shoreline without a name. You stand where a river loosens itself into a shallow sea. The air is thicker than you're used to, fragrant with resin and wet earth. Far inland, low green hills exhale late-day heat. Out over the water, the horizon looks closer, almost tender, as if the sky has leaned down to touch the waves. This is Earth in the Jurassic, about 200 million years in the past, give or take the patience of stone. The calendar here is written in silt and salt, not seconds. We won't rush it. The poles are not the poles you know. If ice exists at all, it is rare and local, a rumor more than a rule. Seas ride higher. Continents are loosening their grip on each other, their edges frayed into gulfs and island chains. Warmth moves easily, carried by broad currents and slow summer winds. Nights are soft. Storms arrive with drumskin thunder and pass like traveling tents of rain. Perhaps you can feel the air itself, a little richer in carbon, a touch more generous with heat. Plants answer by building cities of green conifers with scaled leaves like careful braids, cycads holding crowns of thick fronds, ginkgo trees fluttering fans of light. Underfoot, ferns stitch the ground and horsetails gather where the soil remembers last season's flood. We speak in the present tense because the rocks keep the memory alive, but they whisper. The truth of this world comes to us through careful clues, the kinds of pollen pressed into shale, like tiny stamps, the chemistry tucked inside the shells of creatures that lived and died and settled into mud. We read temperature in ratios of atoms, rainfall in layers of silt and clay, coastlines in the fossils of creatures that never dared the open ocean. Each piece is a lantern. Together they make a dim, steady glow. Close your eyes for a moment, if that feels comfortable, and listen to the water. Shallow waves fold and refold at your feet. Somewhere beyond the reeds, a school of fish breaks the surface in quick silver syllables. Dragonflies thread the dusk. A small lizard, long-toed and light, pauses on a sun-warmed stone, as if deciding between land and reed bed. The day is not in a hurry to end. Across this world, the climate is patchwork, but broadly kind. Along the new-made coasts, humidity breeds forests that move with the wind like slow applause. Farther inland, where distance from the sea stretches the air, the seasons can swing wider, long dry spells, then rain that arrives in theatrical abundance. Rivers spill their banks and spread into floodplains stitched with oxbows, each curve a promise of quiet water, where life can try new shapes. In those floodplains, footsteps write a softer record than bones. Herds pass, some small, some impossibly large, pressing the day's story into mud that sunshine later bakes into stone. We will meet them in time. For now, let the land itself be the main character. It moves underfoot, hardly at all from your perspective, but always from the planet's deep below. Warm rock flows like slow honey. Above, the crust broken into drifting rafts, slides an inch here, an inch there, until coastlines redraw themselves without ever seeming to move. This slow drift matters. When continents lean apart, water rushes in to fill the absence, and with it come new climates. A narrow ocean can be a bellows, pumping moisture inland during warm months, then relaxing into calm. The air learns new routes. Storms find new doors. Over millions of years, deserts retreat from places where monsoon rains now visit, while other regions dry into rust-colored plains that keep their secrets well. Perhaps you notice the light. It has a clarity that comes after rain, as if the sky has rinsed the dust from itself. The sun lingers long enough. That evening is not a line, but a wide field you can stroll across. In the canopy, cicadas practice their measured tremor, resin beads on bark, like amber, caught mid-thought, and the breeze smells faintly of turpentine and wet stone. We should say aloud what we do not know. No human eye saw this world. Our confidence rests on patterns that might be revised by the next quarry wall, the next thin slice of limestone, held to the light. Did the poles stay entirely ice-free? Perhaps not always. Were the tropics uniformly wet? Likely not. Some were seasonally starved of rain. The Jurassic was not a single weather. It was a long music. Themes returning and changing. Instruments dropping out and drifting back in. The planet improvises. We learn the tune by ear. Still, some notes ring clear. Sea level sits high enough to drown the edges of continents, creating broad, shallow shelves where sunlight falls all the way to the bottom and turns water into gardens. Currents lift nutrients like gentle elevators. Tiny plankton draw lines of light into sugar and shell. And when they die, those shells snow down through green water to become chalky beds for future cliffs. This is how a shoreline writes a future hill. Inland, soils deepen on broad plains, red with iron and memory. Fires come, as they always do, where plants and seasons keep company. But the intervals differ. After a burn, seedlings bead the ground like constellations. Some forests are ready for this, and rebound with a quiet confidence. Others shift their composition, making room for species that read smoke as a sign to begin again. At night, the heat lingers. You might lie back on a flat, warm stone and feel the day leaving the land in slow layers. The sky is heavy with stars, though their constellations are not yet named. Bats? Not yet, but wings still move, membrane and scale in the dark. The small and the numerous practicing the grammar of flight. Along the river margin, little jaws click where insects meet opportunity. The world is busy, but not loud. It hums. If you listen carefully, you can hear the slow hydraulics of the carbon cycle at work. Volcanoes exhale, rocks weather, oceans breathe in and out through countless tiny mouths. Over long frames of time, these processes tune the thermostat. When warmth runs a little high, weathering can pull it gently back. When the world leans cooler, volcanism may nudge it up. The Jurassic sits most often on the warm side of comfortable. A planet in a linen shirt, sleeves rolled, never quite cold. And yet, even in this generosity, there are edges, seasons that press harder, years when rains fail, coastlines that migrate inland to swallow forests that had assumed they were land forever. Life learns the lesson again. Nothing on the surface is permanent, but much is persistent. Adaptation is the kind of patience that leaves fossils. Let the chapter close the way the day does here. The last light trades places with the first stars. A breeze lifts across the reeds and returns carrying the mineral scent of the sea. Somewhere in the near dark, a creature walks a path it has walked before, setting down each foot with the ordinary care that by luck and mud and morning sun will harden into a perfect footprint. Millions of years from now, those impressions might be found, measured, puzzled over, and quietly loved. For tonight, we only needed the lay of the land, the warmth, the water, the patient drift. Tomorrow we'll watch the map itself begin to move, and with it the winds, the rains, and the ways that life learns to belong. Rest here a moment longer. Let the shoreline breathe for you. Let the hum of deep time fold around your thoughts like a light blanket. We rise, gently, as if lifted by a warm evening thermal. The coastline, the rivers, the braided bars of sand, all loosen into a broad view of the planet. From up here, the continents look like familiar strangers. Edges softened, outlines not yet what we know. They carry the memory of Pangaea, that once great union, but hairline seams have appeared. The world is beginning to exhale. Far below, a chain of lakes runs like a necklace through a long green valley. The water is the color of tea where reeds gather, jade where it's deep, and white where wind scuffs the surface into tiny handwriting. On some nights there is a faint smell of stone warmed too quickly, a hint perhaps of magma easing into the crust through narrow cracks. Nothing urgent, just the earth adjusting its shoulders after a long stillness. This is the early to middle Jurassic, tens of millions of years, unfolding with the patience of tides. Pangaea, once a single continent, has begun to ease apart. The northern lands lean one way, the southern lands another. Between them, the first threads of an ocean widen, almost imperceptibly, a quiet seam that will one day be called the Atlantic. To the east, a warm corridor of water, the Tethys, spreads like a silk road for currents and life. Names are ours, of course. The planet simply moves. If you listen to the rocks, the lesson comes gently. We find rift basins stitched with red beds and salt, layers laid down by lakes that swelled in rainy seasons and shrank under long, bright suns. We find volcanic intrusions, dark sills and dikes that cut through older stone like careful pen strokes. Evidence that heat was close, that the crust was thinning on ancient seabeds now lifted into hills. We read the marks of shorelines that wandered inland and back again as the land flexed and the seas rose. Each clue is humble on its own. Together they sketch a map that shifts beneath our fingers. Closer to the ground, the drift feels like weather. When continents pull apart, coastlines multiply. And coastlines, those long conversations between land and sea, invite moisture inland. Where a supercontinent once baked under inland skies, monsoon winds now carry rain in generous arcs. Some deserts shrink at their edges, turning to open woodland and river country. Elsewhere, the new geography casts rain shadows and prairies of conifers roll out where forests once stood. Dense, the world doesn't change everywhere at once, or in the same way. It edits itself softly, line by line. Walk with me along one of those rift lakes. The bank is baked clay, cracked into polygons like the skin of cooling bread. A cicada's tremor rises and falls. Horsetails bead the shallows like green metronomes. In the warm air, a small crocodilomorph slides from root to water with hardly a sound, leaving only the V of its passing. Out in the deeper channel, fish flash like coins, and a coelacanth-shaped shadow hangs for a moment, then drifts back into the green. This valley might last a few million years, long enough for sediments to stack like quilts, long enough for whole communities to learn the rhythm of flood and quiet, and then the ground will decide whether to deepen into true ocean, or to knit itself closed again. Even possibilities fossilize. We might picture the newborn ocean as delicate, but its creation is an act of steady force. Along the seam where plates part, hot rock rises and freezes into bands of new seafloor, each pulse of creation a stripe in a pattern that, much later, will let us count the planet's breaths. Mid-ocean ridges are like long, submerged mountain ranges, glowing faintly with heat, feeding minerals into seawater, and shaping currents that carry warmth poleward. In the Jurassic, those currents begin to discover new routes, and climate follows. The Tethys, wide and inviting, becomes a long theatre for life. Its margins are jeweled with reefs, where sponges, corals, and countless small architects build apartments of calcium under clear, warm water. In the quiet lagoons behind those reefs, fine mud falls in patient rain, preserving the tiny marks of fins and the elegant spirals of ammonite shells. Farther out, the open water turns a deeper blue-green, and sleek hunters, ichthyosaurs, then plesiosaurs, learn the rhythms of the continental shelves. The geography grants them stages. They write the choreography. We often ask where we would have lived had we been here. The gentle answer is near the edges. Edges are generous, where river meets floodplain, where forest drifts into meadow, where new coasts soften the old land. Early mammals slip like moving commas through the underbrush. Insects learn the new gardens. Plesiosaurs angle along dusk thermals, searching the lines where land breezes meet sea breezes, and lift them almost without effort. The drift of continents redraws not just maps but chances. In the north, on land that will one day be parts of North America and Europe, shallow seas begin to visit the margins. They are not deep, these waters. Sunlight reaches the bottom and writes in the language of seagrass and soft-bodied things. Tides brush in and out through inlets cut into young coastlines. When storms arrive from the warm ocean, they push sheets of water across low plains, then retreat, leaving behind layers that settle into limestone and shale. A future geologist will tap those layers and hear different notes. Storm, quiet, like measures in a long song. To the south, pieces of Gondwana land that will later become Africa, South America, Antarctica, Australia, India, shift their weight, not all at once, not in any hurry, but the seeds of future oceans are planted, corridors that, in another age, will swell into the Indian and the South Atlantic. For now, the effect is felt as subtle tilts and new coastlines, as mountain belts that begin to waken in the west of a broad northern landmass, sending silt eastward into river systems that lace floodplains for days on end. On those plains, herds will graze in slow arcs, and hunters will follow the cool edges of shade. Perhaps you can feel, too, how drift alters the sky. Winds respect boundaries you can't see on a daily walk. The placement of warm and cold water, the outline of a continent's shoulder, the height of a mountain arc. Shift those, even a little, and storm tracks meander. Some summers become heavy with afternoon rain. Others lean dry, then break in a festival of thunder. In the fossil record, we glimpse these moods in the alternation of mud cracks and ripple marks. In the chemistry of paleosols, ancient soils that hold like diaries, the news of seasons. If this begins to feel like too much movement, let's soften the scale. Bring your attention back to a single leaf, a ginkgo fan fluttering in a lake breeze, or the tight, armored frond of a cycad catching light like a spoon. The plant does not know about plates or ridges. It knows the length of day, the softness of rain, the patience of roots. It knows how to be ready for fire and how to sleep during the dry spell, and wake to the first mossy scent of wet. In that readiness is the secret to surviving maps that chain. There is a human echo here, we might recognize. We redraw our own maps, political lines, coastlines on charts, even the quiet maps inside us, where we belong, who we are close to, what feels like home. The Jurassic suggests that change, given time, can be a kind sculptor. A new inlet admits fresh air. A valley becomes a harbor. Gifts arrive along edges that didn't exist the season before. It doesn't mean every shift is easy. It means life keeps writing. We should admit our uncertainties with kindness. Did the first Atlantic open at the same pace everywhere? Likely not. Rifts start and stall, like a zipper half pulled. Were monsoons stronger or gentler in a given region? The rocks offer a chorus, not a soloist. Some voices suggest wider swings. Others whisper of steadiness. We weigh them. We adjust. We carry the melody forward, ready to revise the measure when a new outcrop hums a different tune. Evening gathers on the rift lake. The water loses its green to a deep, smoky blue. A pterosaur crosses the sky. A slow arrow, body still, wingtips writing delicate corrections in the air. Somewhere on the far bank, a tree lets go a bead of resin. In a few breaths, it will catch a small insect, the way a thought sometimes lands and holds. In a very long while, that bead might harden into amber, carrying, with grace, a fragment of this very night. As darkness settles, the land cools and releases the day's heat into the soft, moving air. The continents continue their almost imaginary slide, the ocean's seam breathes, and tides fold and unfold against newly minted shores. None of this asks anything of you now. There is nothing to solve, only the gentle recognition that the ground beneath all lives is in the longest sense kind enough to change. Let yourself lie back in this chapter's quiet. Feel the world broaden under you, not as a threat, but as a vast breathing room. The maps are drifting, and still, here at the edge of a warm lake, the night is simple. Water, wind, a few stars, and the slow reassurance of stone. Step beneath the green. The light changes as soon as we enter, turning from open sky sheen to a softer, resin-scented hush. Trunks rise like calm pillars. The air holds a sweetness, pine and turpentine, damp soil, and the cooled breath of shade. Our eyes adjust to verticals and fans, scales and fronds. The day slows its pulse. This is a Jurassic Forest part cathedral, part workshop, busy with quiet chemistry. Conifers keep the upper stories, their branches tiered in whorls that catch the sun like careful shelves. Between them stand cycads, stout and dignified, wearing crowns of armored fronds that arch with slow confidence. Ginkgos lift their fans to the light, each leaf veined like a river delta, simple and ancient, fluttering with the tiniest tremor as a breeze explores the understory. At our feet, ferns knit the ground into a patterned rug, and horsetails stake glossy green columns along any trickle of water that remembers last night's rain. If we pause, the forest will introduce itself. A resin drop beads on a conifer's bark, heavy and golden, bending light into an amber lens. A beetle investigates the rim, considers the stickiness and changes its mind. On a log softened by fungi, a millipede writes looping cursive that will be erased by the next shower. Somewhere upslope, a cone lets go and lands with a soft, wooden sigh. The forest absorbs these small notes and braids them into a steady, leafy hush. We sometimes imagine that plants are background scenery for the more dramatic lives of animals. The Jurassic suggests otherwise. These forests are architects of climate as much as they are shaped by it. Leaves and needles sip the air, trading water for carbon in a slow commerce that might be called breath. In their cuticles, those waxy coats lie tiny doorways called stomata, pores that open and close to balance thirst against hunger. In fossil leaves pressed into stone, those pores survive as delicate impressions, and their density gives us clues to the ancient air. When carbon dioxide ran higher, some plants could afford fewer doors. When it dipped, they built more. It is a quiet record, measured with microscopes and patience, that suggests a world generally rich in carbon. Through much of the Jurassic, though not always the same everywhere, nor the same in every century within those long, easy millions of years. Conifers stand here like time-made wood. Some wear small, scale-like leaves laid tight to their twigs, a design that resists drying winds. Others throw long needles into the light, bundled like brushes. Resins move through their tissues, antiseptic rivers that seal wounds, discourage hungry mandibles, and now and then spill outward into beads that will harden into amber. The families are old and bear names we can tuck away like smooth stones. Araucarians with their puzzle box spirals, cypress kin with their columnar grace, broader-leaved cousins suited to moist places. Their shapes tell a story about water and wind. Where the air runs dry and summers linger hot, leaves narrow and guard their pores. Where mists climb the slopes, foliage can relax into broader, flatter forms. The tree is a hedge against weather. Beneath them, cycads hold court, plants that look a little like palms at a glance, though they are something else entirely. Their trunks are often short and armored, built from layers of leaf bases that give them a scaled look. A memory of storms survived and seasons counted. Their roots partner with ancient bacteria that can fix nitrogen out of the air, a quiet collaboration that feeds the soil around them. And their cones, large, fragrant, and in some species warm to the touch for a brief window, invite insects with a chemistry that seems older than flowers. There is a suggestion in fossils and in living cycads today that beetles and tiny determined weevils once traded attention for pollen, beginning a mutualism that predates petals. Not every forest did this. Not every year, but somewhere, in evenings like this one, a cone warmed by its own metabolism may have loosened a perfume into the green, and small armored visitors answered. Ginkgo stands apart, both in the grove and on the family tree. Its leaves split, like the letter Y repeated along delicate fans, veins forking and reforking, a pattern so simple it feels like first principles. In some latitudes the leaves might have turned gold in cool seasons, a soft coinfall that fed soils and river margins. In others, evergreen neighbors did most of the screening while ginkgo kept a measured rhythm of growth and rest. It is tempting to call ginkgo a survivor, a living fossil, though the phrase can be misleading. The lineage persists, yes, but it has not paused. Each generation tries the world again, differing in small, exquisite ways we rarely see. Survival, the forest suggests, is a moving art. Listen to the atmosphere speaking in leaf and wood. Higher carbon took the chill off nights and encouraged generous canopies. Warmer seas sent humid air inland, and with it the possibility of tall forests far from coasts, where rain came regular. Soils deepened and became sponges for roots and mycelium. Where the year split into wet and dry, growth rings in trunks recorded the rhythm, like a heartbeat. Pick up a fossil log heavy as a sleeping animal, and you may find those rings, narrow and wide in alternation, the tree's own journal of feast and lean. Fires visited here too, though their style differed. When the canopy knit itself tight and the air ran moist, burns could creep more than race, remaking patches rather than sweeping across a landscape in a single afternoon. In drier reaches and open woods, flames likely moved with more confidence, leaving charcoal that washed into lakes and settled softly into sediment. Later, under pressure, that charcoal would become a thin black punctuation mark in stone. It is a record of recovery as much as of heat. After a fire, cones open, spores loft, and seedlings write new patterns in the ash. The forest gathers itself, like a breath taken after a long sentence. Every layer of this green world is busy with companionships. Fungi lace the soil, extending roots reach into microscopic neighborhoods. They trade minerals for sugars and introduce distant trees to one another through chemical whispers. Not as conversation perhaps, but as exchange. Insects test leaves, chew careful experiments, and are themselves tested by jaws and beaks that will evolve long afterward in other epochs. Dragonflies queue at pond margins where horsetails light their green candle. On moist logs, cycad seedlings knit between fern fronds, their first leaves tender and ancestral. In this very hour pollen drifts, a golden dust you can taste at the back of the throat if a gust lifts it, moving from cone to cone, from tree to tree, written into the air as surely as birdsong is written into a clearing. If you are willing, step closer to a conifer's bark. Press your palm lightly against its cool patterned skin. Under that surface a vascular river climbs, carrying water taken up by roots through the tree's quiet interior, atom by atom, until it reaches the needles and becomes part of air again. The forest is not a thing apart from the sky. It is a mediated atmosphere, buffered and tuned by chlorophyll and patience. Sunlight arrives as a simple gift. It leaves as sugar, wood, scent, resilience, shade. There is a chronology here, but it doesn't insist on itself. Early in the Jurassic, after the last hard breaths of the Triassic had eased, forests recolonized lands that had been open or thinly wooded. Through the Middle Jurassic, conifers and their allies diversified into many local styles of being trees, some adapted to seasonally dry uplands, others to swampy bottoms and river meanders. By the late Jurassic, on broad continents now, more incised by coasts and raised in places into new highlands, these forests had written themselves into countless dialects. Open Araucarian savannas, stitched with cycads, gallery woods along streams, where ginkgos dotted the light, damp conifer stands with understories of fern, where morning fog moved like a slow animal. Here and there, plant groups we might call transitional, played at flower-like forms. Bennettitolines, with their intricate reproductive structures, suggesting rehearsals for a show that would not fully open until the Cretaceous. The future leaned in, curious but unhurried. The rocks remember these compositions in fragments. A cone flattened but perfect in detail. A fan leaf whose veins still fork beneath a thin gloss of mineral. A palynological rain, a museum of pollen grains and spores that, under magnification, looks like a box of finely carved beads. Each grain carries clues to its parent's identity, and just as importantly, to the climate it preferred. Counting them in a slice of mudstone is like listening with a very small ear pressed to a very old wall. We never hear everything. We hear enough to feel the root. We might ask why these forests mattered beyond their shade and food and shelter. The answer unfurls slowly. Trees draw carbon from air and fix it in wood. When branches fall into rivers and get carried to quiet basins, lakes, floodplains, shallow arms of the sea, some fraction is buried away from oxygen, and over long compressions becomes coal, or dark shales, or simply carbon tucked into the planet's ledger. Volcanoes, in contrast, exhale carbon back to the sky. Weathering, the patient chewing of rock by water and life, pulls it down again. Forests are hands on both sides of this balance. They speed weathering with acids from roots. They bury their own bodies when the geometry of land and water allows. The Jurassic, warm and generous, turned these hands often. There were intervals when volcanoes had more to say, and others when rain and rock and leaf brought the air into different harmonies. No single number captures the whole song, but the trees are always on the staff. The human echo in this green is gentle and a little humbling. Our cities stand where rivers once braided into fertile complexity, where ancient forests taught soil how to be rich. The wooden beams above many of our heads still recite the physics of these trunks. Our breath leaves us, and becomes in the company of leaves, part of sugar we will never taste and shade we will never sit in. To walk in a Jurassic forest is to feel the continuity of this exchange without the busyness of our time. The canopy keeps its own hours. Toward afternoon, a light rain begins. More a luminous mist than a storm. Drops hang like pearls from fern tips, then join and fall, darkening the soil in round, soft syllables. The smell deepens, green on green, leaf on ray. A small herbivore, bird-hipped and graceful, steps out onto the trail, tests a frond with delicate teeth, and moves along without hurry. Its life is tuned to the forest's pulses. Fresh growth after a shower, quieter days in the dry spell. Somewhere far above, a pterosaur drifts over the canopy, invisible now under the roof of needles, but casting for a moment a pale shadow that brushes trunks and vanishes. We might wonder about the nights, when darkness settles among these trees. The world does not sleep so much as rearrange. Moths become the lightest hand against the air. Beetles practice their measured industry, investigating resin cones and the underleaf world. On the ground, a small, whiskered face pauses to listen, then resumes its path between roots, careful as embroidery. The forest exhales a fraction of what it took in by day. Stars drip through openings. Somewhere, a slow drip begins its travel from leaf to soil, and below, water moves toward a stream that does not yet know the sea it will one day join. Uncertainties deserve their own clearing. Did every Jurassic forest look like this? No, some were spare and high, stony and wind-touched, where trees kept low profiles. Others, nearer coasts, breathed salt and lived with the tide's influence. Some regions cycled through drought, so old trees learned to wait with the patience of reptiles, while others knew a gentler year, fog-nursed and even. Were oxygen levels always this kind? Perhaps close to today, perhaps higher in some slices, lower in others. Models differ, and rocks float subtly. Did insect pollination truly begin here in earnest? There are hints pollen clinging to ancient mouthparts, damage patterns that look like the signatures of specific feeding, but the chorus is tentative. We say maybe, and carry on listening. For a moment, rest your back against a trunk. Feel the steady cool. A tree this size gathers light that left the sun 8 minutes ago and turns it, leaf by leaf, into the texture of your evening. The oxygen in your lungs, the softness in the air, the quiet of a path that stays shaded when the day would rather be bright. In deep time, forests have been teachers of steadiness. Even their changes, succession after fire, the long migration of ranges as climates tilt and continents slide, are forms of patience, movements we can hold in our hands only as fossils, maps and layered soils. The rain lifts, and in the clarified light, the forest shows its edges, places where trees thin and meadow begins, where water braids into shallow channels, where a fallen giant feeds a city of mushrooms. These borders are the rooms where new things happen. In the Jurassic, such rooms multiplied as continents opened their coasts to warm seas and monsoon winds. Forests walked with those changes, not in a hurry but with conviction, seed by seed, spore by spore, root by root. Evening gathers. The green leans toward blue. A single ginkgo leaf turns in a breeze and catches the last light like a small signal. We might take it as a reminder that the simplest shapes can carry the longest stories, that a fan of tissue thin as paper and veined like an idea can connect our breath to an atmosphere shared with creatures that will never know us. Let the chapter close softly, as the forest does, shadow rising from the ground, sense deepening, the understory settling its tiny conversations. If it helps, imagine the resin drop we noticed earlier, now half-hardened, holding a curve of evening inside it. Perhaps by some generous luck, it will one day cradle a fragment of this air, a ghost of pollen, a small wing, Perhaps it will travel through stone and time to a future palm, and someone will lift it to the light and see inside, the color of a Jurassic dusk. For now, we only need the hush. Trees above, ferns below, and the sense that breath itself is old and kind. Morning comes on a ribbon of mist. The river slides across its floodplain, with the poise of something that has practiced for a very long time. Sandbars lean like sleeping animals. Side channels braid and unbraid. In the shallows, reeds hold drops from last night's dew, each one a tiny trembling lens of sky. The air carries wet clay, sun-warmed resin, a little sweetness from flowering undergrowth that does not yet know petals in the modern sense, but signals anyway, with chemistry and light. We wait at the edge where water loosens soil into mud, and then the first footfall lands. It is not a stomp, but a measured setting down, as if the earth has been trusted with a careful secret. A sauropod, one of the long-necked, long-tailed keepers of this age, steps from the gallery woods to the river margin. Its neck arcs like a question softened by time. The tail writes a low line through ferns. Behind, others follow, not in parade, but in the steady rhythm of a group that knows how to move without wearing a path too thin. The ground accepts their weight with the slow authority of floodplain clays. Prints fill with clear water, the river's skin adjusts. We name their families later. Diplodocids with whiplash tails and beam-like frames, macronarians with higher brows and deeper chests, forms that will in distant museums be called by household names. Here they are simply animals in morning light, built from hollowed bone and anchored by tendons, vertebrae laced with air to keep the impossible possible. Inside, the lungs likely ran with extra roots, air sacs that looped through the body like gentle bellows, so breath could move efficiently in such a cathedral of flesh. It is an elegant solution borrowed, perhaps, from a lineage heading toward birds, though these giants keep their feet grounded in a different grammar of movement. 4 feet pillar straight, hands without claws in many, hind feet spreading like rounded stars. They do not rush the water. They taste the air first, reading the river's morning as if it were a book laid open to today's chapter. One lowers its head and shears a ribbon of leafy growth, not from the highest canopy, but from willow-like shrubs that braid the bank. Another leans its neck farther, plucking at taller branches as the group arranges itself along the margin, some drinking, some feeding, some simply listening with that whole body attention. Large animals seem to cultivate when noise would not help anyway. Small birds, early on the road to true birds, perhaps, flick close to the hides, testing for insects. A dragonfly draws a blue checkmark against the surface, then vanishes into light. Floodplains in the Jurassic were busy rooms in a sprawling house. The river shifted courses across years and centuries, laying down bars, abandoning channels, biting new arcs into soft banks. Monsoonal rains in some regions swelled it into a bronze, muscular thing, then left behind long, shallow lakes that lasted through the dry months before succumbing to sun and thirsty soil. Each shift made habitat. Sandy levees where conifers took hold, oxbows where lilies and rushes knitted rafts of green, back swamps that smelled of tannin and thyme. In such a mosaic, giants found what they needed: bulk forage, reliable water, safe sightlines, and in return they became gardeners writ very large, pruning here, opening shade there, pushing seeds and nutrients across the plain in patient circuits. We imagine their sound, not a roar, which belongs mostly to stories, but a range of social notes and breaths, low and felt as much as heard. Perhaps a mother murmurs to a calf with a vibration you feel in your ribcage, more than you ever quite hear. Calves stay near the soft protection of massive legs. Juveniles keep a little farther out, confident but watchful, practicing the geometry of the group. Now and then, tails lift just high enough to scratch a thought in the air, then settle again into quiet counterbalance. The day warms, and so do they. Great solar collectors in hides, the color of riverbank bark and shaded stone. Across the water, motion catches the eye. Stegosaurs, wide-backed, low-headed, wearing twin rows of plates that catch light like a slow pageant, graze along a point bar. Their heads sweep left-right, left with the dedication of animals who learn the ground by taste. Plates along the spine rise in alternating rhythm, each edged by a fine network of vessels that might in some moods have let them flush with blood. A sign felt by others, a display, a way to move heat. There are spines too, wicked and elegant at the tail, but they keep them quiet as long as the morning stays simple. Between the plates, the back is a gentle valley where dust can collect and be shaken free. Their feet placed carefully to avoid sinking. Their gaze drifts over the river with the even kindness of a grazing herbivore who has memorized the shapes of threat. And there are hunters. They appear not like thunder but like grammar, the way a sentence turns when the verb arrives. Along the shadow of a fallen trunk, a large theropod watches, still as a stone at first, then shifting weight with the stealth of a cataphract learning softness. The skull is boxier than a later tyrant's would be, the arms longer, the body tuned for a blend of stamina and quick commitment. In some basins we will call such hunters Allosaurus or its kin, in others Megalosaurus or forms we haven't found yet. Each lineage a regional accent of pursuit. Their lives also rid the river, fish stranded in shrinking pools, young herbivores funneled by brush. The sudden wealth after flood, when carcasses, natural or contested, become part of the water's long appetite. Predation here is less a spectacle than a pressure, constant and shaping, like current. Most days, giants and hunters move along each other's edges, adjusting paths by a few meters, changing timing by minutes. When the line tightens, it is quick dust, a scatter of smaller animals, a churned section of bank that tomorrow will look ordinary again. The story already buried under fresh prints. Bones, when they enter the river, are sorted like any other sediment, heavy pieces rolling to a stop where flow loses interest, lighter ones traveling farther to settle in quiet coves. In time, minerals rewrite them grain by grain until they are almost stone, the animal memorized in geology. Evidence for these mornings comes to us not only as skeletons but as traffic. Trackways cross the rock, like notes written in a hand both practiced and huge. You can read speed and size, sometimes even a change of mind. A line of sauropod prints that suddenly widens as the animal detours around softer ground. Parallel rows that suggest a group moving together, the scalloped signature of a tail briefly brushing wet sediment. Herding is a careful word. Behavior can vary, and tracks show passages, not politics. But the patterns hint at social travel. Adults with young, repeated routes to water, perhaps seasonal pilgrimages between floodplain grazing and higher ground when rains pressed the river into boldness. Their bodies tell other stories when we slice them thin and hold them to light. Bone histology suggests growth that is not lethargic at all, but tuned for speed when young. Fibrolamellar tissue laid down fast, like scaffolding that can hold weight as the architecture rises. Teeth show wear consistent with steady, repetitive feeding. Pencil-like in some, broad and spooned in others. Each shape a choice in the menu of leaves and soft stems. Gastrolith stones in the gut appear here and there, smooth and foreign to the local rock, perhaps swallowed to help grind fibrous meals, perhaps more incidental. We say perhaps often because the line between necessary and accidental is thin in a record kept by rivers. The floodplain's smaller citizens move in the lee of all this mass. Early mammals, quick and night-inclined, stitch between logs and roots, harvesting seeds, insects, and opportunities left by giants. Turtles settle where current allows, and sun is accessible. Crocodilomorphs, slimmer than some of their later relatives, share eddies and wait with the patient economy of water watchers. Insects paint the air with short lifetimes and durable strategies. Mayflies brief and precise, beetles methodical, flies investigative. Pterosaurs quarter along the bank, wings feeling for the seam, where rising heat lifts them into easy control. In their turn, they read the river's surface vocabulary. Dimples, skitters, concentric rings that give away a fish near the film. Season writes the chapter headers. In the rising phase, rains upstream turn the water opaque and brown, and the river shoulders into its banks. Giants give it room, gathering on the slight heights of levees, feeding from the trees that stand drier feet. The flood recuts. It plucks a bend here, stitches another there. Fish move into drowned woods to spawn in the newly safe complexity of submerged roots. When the crest passes, water withdraws and leaves behind crescent ponds studded with islands of floating plant matter. These become nurseries for insects and amphibians, then shallow pantries for waders and other opportunists. In the dry, the main channel narrows and clarifies, salt crystals fringe the far flats. The mud at the edges becomes a ledger again, ready for signatures in the hour before dusk. Across regions, the cast changes, but the grammar holds. In lands that will one day be the American West, broad Morrison-like plains collected river stories into green, grey, and red beds. A stacked memory of channels and interludes. Across a future Africa, on coasts that breathed the Tethys, giant skeletons settled into marine-tinged sands where inland and ocean met. In Asia, thick floodplain sequences recorded communities tuned to monsoon pulses, with forests stepping closer to, then away from, channels in time with rain's long promises. The names of formations are our later handwriting over their work. What matters here is that rivers everywhere were generous archivists, saving both the ordinary and the rare. Now and then, fire runs a margin, opening the view. In the weeks after, the floodplain smells of smoke and wet charcoal. New shoots appear in tight greens. The big herbivores test them with measured lips, and small animals reap the flush with nimble gratitude. Plate-backed grazers reoccupy their favorite bars. The river, indifferent to ash, carries what will become part of a black line in a distant hillside, a punctuation mark we read as event and recovery. We carry a few uncertainties with care. How high did the giants browse most days? Tooth wear and neck mechanics suggest many were middle to low feeders, with high browsing as a choice when opportunity invited. Did sauropods spend much time in deep water, buoyed by their bulk? The bones say they were land animals, footpads and limb geometry suited to solid ground, though they surely crossed channels and took coolness where the bank was kind. How exactly did they keep cool under sun? Likely with a blend of behavior, seeking shade, moving air across great surface areas, exploiting those internal airways, and with the simple fact of being tall, where breezes are easier to find. Did the largest move in tight family groups or loose congregations? Tracks hint at both possibilities. Bones sometimes cluster by age. The record encourages humility. There is, too, a human echo along this water. We have our own floodplains, valleys where soils rich and brown remember centuries of silt and kindness. We build near rivers because they carry time at a pace that suits crops and conversation. We also learn the same lessons again and again, that channels move, that a high bank today may be a bar tomorrow, that abundance is seasonal and asks for gratitude more than ownership. Watching sauropods file to water at dawn is, in some quiet way, to recognize a rhythm that still leads us. Wake, go to the river, drink, share a path, return when the light leans. The scale is different. The day is the same. As the sun climbs, heat presses gently on the plain. The giants withdraw to the shade, finding open stands of conifers where air can move under branches. Some kneel in their slow, careful way to rest, rib cages rising like bellows. A stegosaur half dozes, tail angled into a patch of willow shade, plates casting a little chapel of shadow along its back. The hunter from earlier has already ghosted along the tree line toward another reach, pressed as much by insects as by hunger in this hour. The river, unhurried, glances light from riffles where a bar narrows the flow and deepens the song. Evening will bring relief. Thermals soften, and with them the higher air begins to accept wings again. Calves, rested, become exploratory, wading to their ankles and surprising fish that become quick silver smears and vanish. A wind carries the mineral coolness of distant water, where the channel swings near the foot of low hills, and the herd turns, almost as one body, to begin the walk to a favored bar. Footfalls, spaced and considerate, begin their night script on the prepared page of clay. Somewhere in the tall grass, a small mammal pauses to watch, then resumes its stitching. Somewhere else, along a quiet stretch, an egg clutch warms under sand and sun's memory. A future of small feet and first breaths hidden a few hand breaths below the surface. We close the chapter on a bend where the river makes a slow decision. The last light ladders down through a gallery of branches. Insects practice their evening vowels. In the shallows, a sauropod lifts a dripping foot and sets it down with the gentleness of someone setting a bowl on a table for friends. The print blooms with clear water. It will hold the night sky before it holds silt, before it holds the next day's dust, before perhaps it holds nothing at all. and becomes part of an ordinary bank. Or, if luck and flood and burial align, it will harden, survive, and become a window. A child in a far century will press a palm into that stone and feel for a breath. This same moment, river dusk, a great life passing by untroubled and whole. Let your shoulders soften with the current. Let the breath take the river's pace. Large as these animals are, the quiet they carry is larger. In their company, the world feels older, kinder, and very patient. Begin with air. A warm-up draft slides along a sunlit cliff, and the morning lifts into motion. The sea below murmurs in polished blues, between the limestone islands and the quiet, pale lagoons. Wings begin to write on the sky. Curves, checks, glide so long they seem like thoughts stretched to the horizon. The first flyers of this age do not flap toward the sun, so much as lean into it, letting the heated air carry them the way a river carries a leaf. Plesiosaurs appear as silhouettes before they resolve into creatures' membranes stretched from elongated finger to ankle and body, a sail tuned for nuance. Bones are light, walls thin and honeycombed with struts, a cathedral built to weigh almost nothing. Along the wing's surface, fine internal fibers might stiffen and shape the camber like threads in a kite, so that even small corrections matter. Many wear a halo of soft, short filaments, pinna fibers that blur the outline and hint at warmth kept and lost with precision. Some faces end in slender, fish-trusting beaks. Others hold a jawline like a pair of narrow tongs. And on more than a few heads, crests rise. Modest ridges in some, sail like flags in others, display species signal, or perhaps a wind vane's feel for the air itself. The reasons are plural, the sky generous to meaning. They launch with sudden, practiced power. From a limestone shelf, one crouches, levers forward, and is airborne in a single, decisive beat, forelimbs and hindlimbs part of the same choreography, a quadrupedal push that seems to gather the ground and release it all at once. Another steps into a breeze, and lets the cliff do half the work, lifting in a patient, sideways pause until the wing bites, and the glide becomes a line. Over the lagoon, the morning darkens with forms, small insect hawkers, the size of a swallow, long-tailed fishermen with arrow-straight silhouettes, broader-winged cousins that surf the invisible ridges of heat, rising from pale, sun-glossed muds. Below, the water holds silver. When light angles just right, schools flash their agreement, and a pterosaur answers in a precise downward fold. Jaws meet the surface with a soft, practiced pinch, not the theatrical skimming of stories, perhaps. Sustained trawls would punish a thin jaw, but quick strikes, snatches at the margin where reflection and reality overlap. Others quarter over reed beds, the membranes hardly moving, wingtips writing small changes into air. When a gust frets the lagoon, the flyers shift to the lee of an island, and hold there, riding the calmer scene the way a river otter rests in an eddy. The world below offers many runways. Sand flats warm early, and release gentle thermals, stairs no one can see. Cliff faces teach air to rise, the very edges where land learns to be water, those long, shallow fans of tide and reveal, become highways for creatures who trust nuances more than strength. Pterosaurs seem to read these subtleties with a full-body literacy, the tilt of head, the slight splay of toes, the way the neck itself becomes a rudder. When they turn into the wind, you can almost hear the quiet geometry of lift and drag speak, numbers translated into featherless grace. Feathered flight is arriving too, hesitantly, exquisitely, in an archipelago of lagoons and chalk-pale, breathless basins. A small, lightly built creature settles on a branch above water that keeps secrets exceptionally well. Its body holds a tail, long by later avian standards, vertebrae counted like beads. Its hands still wear claws, its jaws keep small teeth like delicate pins. But the arms, those arms hold pugnacious feathers, veined and asymmetric, the kind that in our time mean business. We might call it early bird, we might say avian line dinosaur, we might whisper a name given by a future quarry, where fine-grained stone preserves impossibly thin things. The exact word is less important than the impression night black feathers in light, the first practice attempts at a new way of being in air. Was it a flapper or a glider? perhaps both at once depending on mood and branch. The breastbone is not yet the deep keel of a later flyer. The shoulder joints hold promise more than certainty. It might launch with a hop and a flurry, then settle into a controlled fall that is really a glide, then a few more beats to turn a corner of sky. Landing is a negotiation, a branch chosen with care, the tail a long counterweight, the claws a last-minute assurance. Insects here are plenty. The lagoon carries small fish to the surface with every warm hour. A life can be built out of such consistencies. Above this newcomer, pterosaurs own the broader lanes. Through earlier Jurassic mornings, many had long tails ending in little rudders, a diamond flag to counter yaw and keep balance honest. As time slides toward the late Jurassic, some lineages shorten those tails and widen their heads, jaws lengthening into narrow instruments, necks stiffening into assemblies of interlocking, efficient shapes. The sky diversifies much like a shoreline does. New bays invite new habits invite new bodies. On one island, small, dusk-loving flyers lift on moth tides and right loops against a pinking horizon. On another, larger ones rise late in the morning and climb until they are ideas more than animals, specks that slide from one column of rising air to the next, covering distances the ground would measure in days. We picture colonies without pushing them into modern comparisons. On cliff shelves streaked with guano and sun, groups gather and keep space with a wing's breadth between. Keening notes rise and fall. A mix of claims and courtesy, heads tilt, crests catch light, and the wind takes the smell of the place offshore. Salt, life, a little sweet sharpness of fish, on flatter ground where the tide draws lines twice daily. Eggs lie under sand and plant litter, shells more like leather than porcelain, protected less by thickness than by cover and company. Parents stand in the wind and keep watch, bodies angled as if listening to the air for news of other wings. When the eggs give up their secrets, the young come out creased and soft, made for growth. Perhaps they walk quickly, wings held close, shadowing the adults to places where food moves in shining, predictable ways. Perhaps they need a season of quiet before air is permitted to hold them. The record offers pieces and asks us to hold them gently. These are not the only airborne scripts. In forest clearings inland, daylight runs grainy with insects, and small pterosaurs hawk them with turns so tight they seem to pivot around their own shadows. Over river bends in the late gold of afternoon, larger flyers track fish that betray themselves with rings and slivers. From sandbars, takeoffs are brief, a smooth two-beat into an easy banking exit. At times the air is busy enough that you can hear wing membranes drum a little on their own rush, a low, skin-deep sound like a sail's private conversation. We might wonder how such light creatures wintered, or if winter here was more a notion than a necessity. In many Jurassic places the year leaned warm and the range narrow, the shifts a matter of rain and not rain more than frost and thaw. Where seasons pressed harder, the sky itself moved, migratory paths written along coastlines and through valleys, invisible corridors that the flyers traced with a fidelity we will never fully see. The planet's warm currents, both water and air, taught routes the way rivers teach fish. Some mornings whole ribbons of wings would be strung along the coast, punctuated by glides and short purposeful flaps, the rhythm of a long day's travel. Feathers, meanwhile, were doing what feathers do best, offering options. They insulate, they display, they feel the air, they catch it when asked. In the late Jurassic, the palette of feathers is already complicated, downy. Filaments close to skin, broader veins along arms and tail, covert layers that smooth what roughness would otherwise tug at. Color, perhaps pigments fossilize rarely, but not never. Some tiny structures suggest darks and lights, patterns meant for forest light or lagoon glare. We will keep our voices soft here, admitting that much remains a blur, and that blur is honest, an invitation rather than a lack. In the language of chronology, the sky tells a simple story with many footnotes. Early on, long-tailed pterosaurs surf the air with admirable confidence. As time folds forward, forms we later group as pterodactyloids rise to prominence. With shorter tails, sometimes exaggerated headgear, and a knack for coastlines. Near the very end of this period, small birds true enough to the later name to own it, perch above lagoons whose fine-grained muds will one day hold their ghosts in such detail that the outline of a feather's barb is still there to trace. In those stone leaves you can see an impression of the air itself, The way lift leaves fingerprints on matter if given enough patience and quiet. If all this motion begins to quicken your mind, let's pause with a single wing. Feel how it would take the breeze, membrane drawn smooth like a slow breath held, then released, the way a feathered limb gives a tiny tremor at the wrist to tighten the hand of air it holds. Imagine the density of atmosphere as an ally, not resistance, but resource, something to push against and be pushed by. Many creatures in many hours learn invisible roads, thermals, slope winds, sea breezes, returning at evening. To fly is to memorize kindnesses we cannot see. There are small, nighttime chapters too. Over dark lagoons, the moon whitens the skin of still water, and moths codwomple toward it in a muted, fragrant rush. Small flyers, membrane-winged, thread through that pale st. In forest edges, a feathered shadow leaves a low branch and crosses a patch of starlight without a sound. The tail a dark tally mark behind. No bats yet, not for a long part of time. So the crepuscular and the night belong to those who solve it differently. Eyes wider, wings larger for the same body, a willingness to read the air by touch. The human echo in these skies is immediate and gentle. We too learn invisible routes. Draft behind a truck to save fuel on a long drive. Angle into a headwind when walking up a city avenue. Stand on a hill to catch a signal. Our phones translate into conversation. Pilots search for thermals and ridge lift with instruments that, in essence, confirm what a pterosaur felt in the bones of its arm. Even downstairs from flight, we learn currents, social, seasonal, the moods that swell in us at dusk and ease by morning. Watching a membrane tilt to ride a whisper of rising air is to remember that the world is full of helpful slopes you cannot see. Toward late day, the lagoon's ceiling lowers to gold. Picture a station keep above the tide's glassy lip, then peel away one by one toward cliffs cut into cream-colored stone. The feathered ones work the lee side of a stand of conifers, then vanish into green with a last, neat fold. The air cools first at the edges, then in the middle. Thermals drop, leaving only the steady laminar gift off the sea. Even that grows thin. We collect our uncertainties and place them carefully as the light fades. Did every crest herald a mate? Perhaps not. Some may have been maps for muscles or side effects of growth. Did early birds fly hard or only fall with style? The bones suggest a capacity, but the degree remains a spectrum rather than a point. Were the skies crowded or sparse? Likely both at different hours in different places. Colonies adine above one island, a single solitary sail over another. Humility is part of flight. Knowing when to turn back is as important as knowing how to go. For a last image, hold this. A pterosaur at the cliff edge. The sea breathing below. It faces into evening wind, lets the gust climb its chest and wing, and becomes for a suspended moment, not quite separate from the air. Then it folds, settles on a ledge, with companionable squeaks from its neighbors, and tucks its head down the shoreline. A small, feathered creature shifts its toes around a branch and closes its eyes, feathers lifting imperceptibly as the night's first cool slips through. Let your breath follow the long glide from cliff to roost. Inhale with the rise, exhale with the slow banking turn. The sky keeps its lanes, even in darkness. Our part is simple now. Rest in the memory of it, membrane and feather, lift and hush, and let sleep arrive like a soft thermal under the ribs, carrying you without effort toward a quiet moonlit harbor. Begin with a surface barely moving. Dawn lays a sheet of pale metal over the sea, and the horizon wears a thin band of peach that seems to breathe. We stand at the lip of a warm, shallow shelf where the continent relaxes into water. Waves arrive in long, unhurried sentences. Somewhere far offshore, a ridge hums to itself in darkness, making new seafloor as quietly as yeast makes bread rise. Here at the margin, the world invites us to lean forward, to let the body become a little larger than its land shape, and slip. The first chill gives way to a green-lit interior. Sunlight pours down like sifted flour, setting dust motes of plankton aglow. The shelf is wide, a light-filled table that stretches toward deeper blues, Its floor is a garden of textures and patient architects. Corals and sponges do their measured masonry, building small fortresses out of light, time, and dissolved stone. Sea lilies lift feathered arms from slender stalks, catching what the water brings. Urchins whisper over limestone with a sound like a pencil on paper. A school of fish rearranges itself as if remembering something, then forgets again. A shadow tilts over the bottom and becomes a body, sleek as a confession. An ichthyosaur crosses our view, all muscle and intention. The head is long, the jaw edges fine, the eye large and glass dark, a lens for dim mornings and deeper evenings. Tail fin scythes in a patient, two-beat rhythm. Up, down, the spinal column turning at the tip into a crescent of speed. It is not a fish, though it could convince you. It is a reptile that has taken the sea's shape seriously and made it home. It breathes air, seeks surface, writes its life in arcs from blue to brighter blue, and returns to hunt in this lit green that feels in this hour like a chap. Around it, the sea keeps counting coils. Ammonites rise and fall with tides of chemistry. Shells plan a spiraled into elegant, living diagrams. Their chambers, stacked like rooms in a perfect tower, are tuned by a thin, living tube that adjusts gas and liquid with the care of a watchmaker. The buoyancy is a controlled whisper. Each species wears suture lines where shell walls meet the outer curve in patterns so ornate they look like frost on glass. Flames, leaves, lace, complexity born from structural needs and evolutionary habit. Some are small as shirt buttons and drift among the plankton like coins tossed in a fountain. Others fill both hands. A few become dinner plates turned on edge, sailing lives made of cautious locomotion and quick decisions. Close by, other hunters trace their own geometry. Plesiosaurs, long-necked in some lineages, short-skulled and broad-headed in others, move with strokes of 4 paddles that pull water in overlapping figure eights, flight grafted onto sea by other means. In the long-necked forms, the head at the end of the tether is modest, a mouth for small fish, for sudden darts at shoals, and the neck itself becomes the strategy. Keep the sleek body outside the nervous perimeter of prey. Send only the quiet, minimal end into the cloud of silver. In the shorter-necked, larger-skulled cousins, the strategy shifts to commitment. A surge, a clamp, a twist, then stillness. The sea edits itself around such decisions, closing and smoothing as if embarrassed to have been interrupted. We rise with one breath to see the world from above. Lacework reefs ring pale lagoons, their outer faces meeting an ocean that deepens from mint to cobalt. Inside the rings, water slows and clears. Fine mud settles into films, so delicate that one day in some bays even the tremor of a fin will be recorded. Beyond the shelf's rim, a slope tumbles into open water, where currents are not just directions but personalities. Along these paths, coccolithophores, tiny algae wearing suits of chalk platelets, spin sugar from sun, then die and snow downward in a flurry that, given time, will pile into white cliffs on coasts we have not drawn yet. The sea, generous and recursive, keeps turning light into stone, and stone into light. Return beneath. On a sand flat that shimmers with heat's memory, a cephalopod that lacks a shell, cousin to the belemnites, hangs like a thought, skin writing messages in pigment flashes. Nearby, a belemnite itself holds station with modest fins, the hard, bullet-shaped guard hidden within like a spine of stone. Hooks on its arms, delicate, precise, compose a net of intention. A small fish dares the edge, is measured, and is gone. The ocean is full of devices, all tested by the slow arguments of survival. We follow the ichthyosaur as it angles upward. The surface bursts around it with a soft sound like tearing silk. A breath is taken almost on the run, a clean swap of air for air, and the body tips back under without losing the line of its travel. There is a rumor, read in fossils, that some of these sea dwellers bore live young tiny versions emerging tail first from a mother's body into water as their first sky. It would make a certain quiet sense in a life that cannot afford the delay of beach-torn journeys. We say perhaps we hold the specimen in our mind, like a small, luminous shell, and we return to the swim. The sea here is not always benevolent. In some slices of Jurassic time, waters farther from shore go dark in their own way, oxygen thin at depth, life concentrated near the lid of light and air. What dies in the dim settles into black shales, carbon layered like a sigh held too long. Volcanic breaths change the chemistry, weathering answers. Currents rearrange promises. Still, on the shelves and along the coasts, abundance keeps its appointment with morning. You can stand at the edge and watch line after line of life cross a sandbar at flood shoals like liquid mercury. Small reptiles slender as whips, shadows of larger bodies cruising beneath the seam where lagoon meets sea. Color seems louder underwater. A reef face wears blues that never quite belong to air. Sponges carry oranges the color of tea in a clay cup. A fish turns and is suddenly copper, suddenly moss, according to the angle. Even the coils flash, mother of pearl under a patina of traveling life. We do not know the exact palettes these creatures chose. Pigment, like memory, is particular and often perishable. But structure, iridescence, matte, gloss, as rules that keep showing up even when colors vanish. Patterns might have been high contrast for schooling, or soft for ambush, or simply the accident of a diet rich in certain molecules. The sea is a lenient painter and reuses brush. There are slower stories on the bottom. Olds, tiny grains with concentric coats of carbonate roll in warm shoals where agitation and chemistry conspire, making nth-degree pearls out of nothing in particular. Microbes build low, lumpy pavements that trap and bind sediment into layered domes. Life writing geology one bacterial film at a time. Burrowers turn the top inches of seabed into a busy suburb, dwelling in soft tubes, pushing out coils of clean sand, keeping the interface between water and ground oxygenated. Conversational. We will say the word dragon because the eye asks for it, and our stories have always poured themselves into that mold when long bodies and large teeth meet water. A pliosaur rises from the blue like a slowly drawn blade, head broad, neck thick, jaws long enough to make the sea reconsider a few things. It does not rush. It edits the distance between itself and its goal, until the last meter requires only one decision, then a turn, a push, a bloom of bubbles, and the sea forgets the disturbance almost at once. We add no gore to this page, only the understanding that energy does not disappear, but changes address, and many lives are written on that envelope. If the pace quickens in your mind, soften with the tide. Let the swell lift and set you without urgency. On the outer face of the reef, pterosaurs draw check marks against the sky, and go on. Below, a cloud of belemnites unknots and rickknots, the group thinking with many small brains. Farther along the shelf, sand waves climb and slip in place, sculpted by persistent invisible hands. The world runs on repetition and surprise in equal amounts. You are held by both. Chronology drifts through this water like a slow current. Early in the Jurassic, some ichthyosaurs reach impressive diversity and size, their forms converging on speeds and deficiencies that fish already knew. As time lengthens, these lines adjust, some fading, some shifting role, while plesiosaurs and their broader-headed kin grow into dominance as coastal rulers. Not by overthrow, but by opportunistic arrival. Reefs, damaged hard at the end of the previous age, rebuild in 1,000 local dialects. Sponges here, corals there, hybrid communities that speak the language of place rather than purity. Toward the late Jurassic, chalk begins to become a serious verb. The tiny architects with calcite plates multiply, and the oceans learn new ways to store light in stone. None of this happens everywhere. All of it happens somewhere, and the map of places slides under the sky like a slow, contented beast. We carry, as always, a handful of careful uncertainties. How fast did the largest plesiosaurs truly grow, and how warm did their bodies run? The bones suggest high performance. The water suggests a need for heat management. Truth likely lives in a thermal regulatory style that defies our land-born categories. How social were these marine reptiles? Some mass strandings hint at groups. Other finds point to solitary routes stitched by instinct alone. Did ammonites float like balloons or steer like submersibles? The answer is a spectrum, some more planktonic and drifting, others heavier, hugging slopes and shelves. Mussels as narrators, even their sexes may have worn different sizes of shell, a dimorphism written in spirals that we're still learning to read. We say maybe. We listen again. There is a small evening the sea performs each day, beneath the big one. When the sun tilts, plankton rise in a migration so vast, it counts as weather. Predators follow, Followers follow them. The shelf becomes a lobby at intermission. Everything moving, everything murmuring. A shift change, written in living dots. In this hour the water cools slightly, and the long-necked hunters harvest at the borders of cloud and clarity. The coils, meanwhile, ride it all with a patient competence, valves opening, fluids adjusting. A tiny, persistent meth that keeps a shell at the level where its life makes the most sense. We surface near dusk. The wind has found a little more of its voice. Across the lagoon, the reef exhales a catalogue of small sounds, pops, clicks, a crackle like rain on tin, as countless mouths and claws negotiate the thin layer between water and stone. Far offshore, waves rise in easy-shouldered ranks and bow under the weight of sky. Plesiosaurs angle home to cliffs that glow cream against the blue. A long, feathered tail vanishes into the green of a coastal grove, where a small, early bird chooses a branch. From here, the sea looks smooth as sleep. Our echo is simple. We have always been drawn to edges like this one. We build villages where the shelf steps down. We face west to watch the sun dissolve. We listen to a tide as if it were reading to us from a book we recognize, but cannot quite quote. The Jurassic offers a version of that room with different furniture, different shells on the table, different shadows moving under the surface, but the same lullaby in the walls. In out, a planet, breathing. Let the chapter close with one coil held up in the mind's hand. It spiraled rooms like a staircase to nowhere in particular, and everywhere at once. Imagine the animal that built it, measuring salt and light with an unhurried intelligence that never needed words. Imagine, too, the sleek bodies that shared its water, the reefs that rose and fell, the chalk that dreamed itself into cliffs that tourists will someday pinch between finger and thumb, like cake. All of it is here, layered and calm. Breathe with the tide. Let the green light fade to blue, the blue to grey, the grey to the comfortable dark behind your eyes. The ocean goes on speaking, whether we are awake to hear it or not. Tonight it will keep our place in the story, and hold us, gently, in the quiet between waves. Begin with a sky that has been waiting. Heat gathers through the morning, the kind that rises from sandy gullies as wavering light. Far inland, you can see the day stacking itself into towers, clouds building like slow cliffs, their undersides darkening, their tops feathered white. Leaves still. Insects pause and then resume, as if to keep faith with routine. The smell of dust becomes the smell of water to come. Then the first drop lands, a large warm coin on the forearm of the world. Another follows, then a velvet scatter, then the full theatre. Wind arrives, not cold but purposeful, and the forest leans into it with a soft, unanimous murmur. Curtains of rain advance across the floodplain, turning distant conifers into grey watercolour. In minutes the dry channels speak again, small at first, then confident, then braiding with their neighbours into a moving bronze page. The ground shines, the air loose. You taste the minerals in the rain as if the sky had been steeping in stone. This is the monsoon's hour, one of many the Jurassic learned to count. When continents tilt apart, coasts multiply, and seas breathe warmth inland, the year in many places begins to divide into generous wet and patient dry. The sun's path, the shape of land, the invitation of new ocean corridors, they conspire to lift air, to wring it out over plains and young uplands, then to leave behind a long, open season, when roots must remember and rivers must hold their shape with less help. The planet writes with water, and pause. If we walk in it, the rain changes everything we know by smell and sound. Resin sharpens. Ferns turn glossy, their fronds stippled with beads that collect and fall in a measured musical code. Mud remembers feet and makes a memory of each step. In the understory, cycads unfurl a little farther, their armoured crowns catching drip lines as if measuring the storm. On the river, foam builds below riffles into travelling daisies that braid and unbraid. Somewhere above the canopy, pterosaurs step sideways into the wind and ride the gust lines, dark commas against a page suddenly alive with motion. Monsoon is not a storm, it is a breath. It arrives and withdraws by the season, not the day, and its pulse governs the chores of the land. Seeds wait for it. Soils form around its promises. Animals grow and breed on its calendar. The floodplain's silt is laid down in signatures you could read with a fingertip. Fine layers from quiet days. Thicker beds from rains that hurried, thin black lines where fires visited just before the wet returned. In each stack is a chronology of patience and abundance, of scarcity and rehearsal. Not every region speaks this dialect. Some Jurassic coasts knew steadier rain, diluted seasons, fogs that kept mornings honest. Some uplands stayed spare and wind-bright, their rivers crisp and quick, their storms rare but declarative. Yet across the broad middle of this age, water often travelled with rhythm, and life wrote its habits into that metronome. Elsewhere, another language rises, one you feel beneath your feet, rather than on your skin. It begins deep, heat working its slow insistence through thickened crust, pressures easing along fractures, magma moving into old rock, like ink into paper. There is a day when the earth opens a seam, and the air learns a new smell. The sharp, mineral edge of gases, meeting sky. Nothing explosive here at first, just the beginning of something steady and immense. Volcanism is the planet's way of adjusting its posture. In the early Jurassic, a great outpouring had already announced the end of an older era. The world had taken a hard breath. Now, as time advances, other provinces wake broad. Basaltic floods in high latitudes, dikes like stone stitches, sewn through continental fabric. Over weeks, months, years, the ground gives up dark rock that arrives hot and cools into geometry. Columns of basalt, curved, ropey surfaces, wide, stepped plains that change rivers and teach new paths to wind. Ash falls through rain and becomes the next day a delicate glaze on leaves, then a part of soil that will grow a different suite of plants for a time. The air hears this too. Volcanoes exhale more than heat and ash. They breathe gases that work on climate's levers. Carbon dioxide joins the sky's chemistry, and over decades to centuries, and then to lingering thousands, temperatures lean a little warmer. Oceans absorb a little more. Currents choose new corridors. In some intervals, the sea low on oxygen lays down black shales that preserve the quiet of those years like a sealed room. Elsewhere, weathering answers rain, slightly more acid because of what the sky now carries, chews silicate rock, and draws carbon back into rivers and then into marine stone. In this long balance, exhale, inhale, Earth keeps time. We can stand on a cooled flow and hear rain strike it. A small applause on basalt. Lava has turned into polished black benches where seedlings take purchase, their roots testing cracks that hold thin, promising soil. Ferns arrive early, light as green smoke, then shrubs, then young trees. In the spaces between, insects discover a new geometry of shade and sun, pterosaurs quarter low, intrigued by the heat that still lifts from the surface and makes the air wobble in a way wings understand. Eventually, the lava plain will look like any other piece of country to those who cannot read rock, but for a long while it has a particular smell, metallic wet stone, a hint of glass. Between rain and fire runs breath, the slow planetary respiration that routes carbon through leaf and root, river and shell, mantle and sky. Each conifer needle is a doorway for this exchange. Each drop of resin that hardens into amber is a tiny vault. In lakes, mats of algae stitch sunlight into long, soft rolls that, when buried, become part of the deep ledger. In the sea, armies of the small wrap themselves in mineral and fall as chalk when their hours are done. On land, wood becomes peat. Peat becomes coal, where burial and patience conspire. Elsewhere, wood simply returns to air in fungi's careful arithmetic. The numbers drift, widen, narrow, but the cycle keeps its solemn grace. Fire belongs here too, not as catastrophe but as punctuation. Lightning during the first brave storms of the wet season can find what the dry left ready. Litter curled and thin, standing dead stems that have given up their water. Flames move low and quick under open canopies, licking, not leaping, renewing more than erasing. In moister stands they crawl and then give up, smoke weaving away through trunks. Charcoal flakes wash into rivers when the next rain comes, and becomes a thin blackness in floodplain stacks, a whisper of heat in the language of silt. Life reads this as an opportunity. Some cones open, some seeds germinate more eagerly. Browsers find fresh, protein-rich shoots where ash has sweetened the soil. Not all fire is gentle. on slopes where drought has leaned too long, or in years when the wet arrives late. Heat can run up trunks into crowns and write its own bold, short chapter. The forest later tells the story in growth rings that tighten, in cohorts of even-aged saplings that began as a choir after silence. Yet even here, the land's patience prevails. Roots knit, spores drift. The next monsoon carries silt to cover the burn. You can walk through such a place seasons later and find yourself in a room of young light, a pale green that promises a canopy, but is not in a hurry to finish the ceiling. Chronology leaves its thread through these moods. Early Jurassic climates settle after the previous age's tumult. Warmth widespread, deserts in retreat at some margins where new coasts invite rain. In the early Middle Jurassic, mountains stir in the far west of a northern landmass, their newborn heights bending winds and birthing rivers that ferry silt toward inland seas. Midway through, the sea in some bisons leans towards silence at depth, black shales forming in a hush that suggests stratified waters and high surface productivity. Later, toward the end of the Jurassic, the planet's seams continue their quiet business offshore, adding ridges that nudge currents and keep warmth moving toward high latitudes. Through it all, forests breathe, volcanoes speak in chapters rather than shouts, and monsoons keep time on vast floodplains. We hold uncertainties with care, like warm stones. How much higher did carbon dioxide run in this slice or that? Leaf pores suggest ranges. Isotopes in shells add a second opinion. Models tune and retune with every new outcrop's testimony. Oxygen in the air, enough for fire to visit. Perhaps higher than today in some intervals. Perhaps close. Perhaps varied by region in ways the rock only partly preserves. How widespread were the anoxic seas during particular years? Black shales speak from some bisons. Others remain mute or erased. The chorus invites humility. The melody, warm, humid, seasonally dramatic in many regions, remains steady enough to hum along to. If the scale begins to feel too grand, return to one leaf in rain. Watch a droplet gather at its tip, lengthen, hesitate and fall. That moment holds the physics of the world. Gravity, surface tension, a boundary between air and water, thin as a thought. The droplet carries dissolved carbon, a fraction of the air's breath, towards soil, where roots and minerals will consider it, and make decisions millions of years old. A simple fall, and yet it is part of a climate's arithmetic. The leaf is an instrument of weathering, the soil a gallery of reactions. The stream that will carry this small gift to the sea is already telling the coast what shape to take next century. There is a human echo along this whole chapter that might soften the heart. We have our wet seasons and dry spells, our years of fire and years of growth rings close together. Our cities learn floodplain grammar the way young stegosaur herds learned river margins, through visits and corrections, through paying attention. We take stones from cooled lava to build walls. We stand under awnings and listen for the moment a storm slackens enough to invite us out. We burn fields to renew them, and in better hours do so with knowledge of wind and gap and timing. We breathe out into air that will carry our past to leaves we will never see. The scale shrinks, but the script rises. Evening returns on a day that has been generous. The last showers wander east. The smell of wet dust gives way to the sweetness of sap warmed just once more by late sun. From far away, a low line along the horizon hints at older fires in another valley. Nothing frightening here, just the trace of heat having done its brief work. The floodplain gleams. Puddles hold little moon. On a basalt bench near the river's bend, a dragonfly rests, polishing its glassy wings with delicate legs, as if to remove the day's arithmetic of droplets. We might close by listening for breath itself. Not ours, though yours may have found a slower pace by now, but the planet's, the long inhale of weathering and burial, the long exhale of volcano and metamorphic stone, the small daily exchange at every needle and pore. In that wider respiration, monsoon is a heartbeat, fire a blink, black shale a long delicious sigh held under water, for a while before being folded into cliffs. Then beaches, then sand, then perhaps glass. Nothing is lost, only transformed and loaned forward. Let the last image be simple. Rain's whisper in the leaves grows thin, then stops. The ground radiates a memory of warmth into a night that is generous and mild. Somewhere beneath your feet, heat travels slowly through rock, unconcerned with our hours. Above, the first stars gather like seeds on a dark palm. If the air carries the faintest smell of cooled stone and distant smoke, take it as the world's lullaby. Wet, warm, and at ease with change. Rest here. The storms have passed. The fires are banked. The breath goes on, steady as tide, soft as sleep. Wait for the light to thin. Evening slides down the trunks like cool water, and the forest's green turns to a deep, forgiving blue. Day voices soften. The dry chatter of cicadas fades. The wing whoosh of larger flyers ebbs, and another choir warms up in the wings. A cricket finds its single, patient note. A frog lifts a careful, bubbling call from somewhere near the oxbow. Leaves resume their private conversation with the breeze. What felt like hush becomes, with listening, 100 small stories told at close range. A twig quivers near the base of a conifer and resolves into a whiskered face, no longer than a thumb, dark eyes. A triangular head that tilts and tilts again, passing the air with a precision that seems almost mathematical. The body is cloaked in fur, a technology of warmth that might have come early to this lineage, each hair catching the last silver of dusk. Ears as thin as petals, the animal steps forward with a tactful exactness, placing feet where sound will not travel, nose writing sentences in the damp. This is a Jurassic night, and these are its keepers, mammals and mammal-kin, in sizes we could cup without effort. Most of them old hands at shadow. They move through root and litter with the confidence of those who have studied dark as if it were scripture. Quiet is not absence here. It is a medium. We sometimes tell ourselves that the age of giants left little room for smallness. But the ground disagrees. Under ferns, beneath low cycads, along the margins of pools and the hollow cores of fallen logs, the underworld hums with industry. The big animals write wide gestures under the sun. The little ones stitch the margins, erase and rewrite trails nightly, choose fruiting bodies to excavate, seeds to pocket, eggs to test, insects to ambush. They are editors, recyclers, scouts, and in their numbers, the pulse. Listen to one thread. A shiver of leaf litter so slight you'd miss it if you blinked, announces a slender body shaped for passing between grass blades. The forelimbs are compact, the hind limbs spring-loaded. When it pauses, the head lifts, and whiskers flare outward like sunbursts, radars tuned to touch. The jaws part just enough to taste the air. A beetle, busy at the edge of a decaying cone, becomes a small event. There's no flourish, only a quick, efficient meeting of teeth and chatin, a swallow, and a return to motion. The little hunter's heartbeat settling back to its capable trot. If we could hold one of these night citizens in the light for a moment, we might see details that slend their confidence. The lower jaw is a single, sturdy bone now, hinged to the skull with a joint suited for exact work. Tiny middle ear bones, once part of the jaw apparatus in some distant ancestors, have migrated into the ear's quiet architecture. They relay vibrations with care, buying the night an extra measure of meaning. Teeth come in specialized rows, little cones, cusps, and crests arranged for puncture. Slice, grind, writing diets into enamel. The body's core runs warm. Fur helps keep it that way, and the animal pays the higher cost of a furnace with steady foraging and cautious naps in quarters that remember the day's last heat. Beneath the science, there is craft. Burrows turn soil into shelter. They bend air into a climate that changes more slowly than the world above. Some are simple, a single run, and a sleeping ball lined with softer things stolen from nests and seed heads. Others are busier, branching galleries with a pantry-side chamber, a back door in case of teeth, a nursery scooped to fit the curve of a body that will soon breathe for more than itself. Roots thread the ceilings like constellation. A beetle strays in now and then, delivers a small fortune in protein, and fails to leave a written record. Not all small lives stay strictly on the ground. Against the twilight, a shape glides from one conifer to another, not falling so much as choosing a slow lane through air. A membrane, skin stretched between limb and limb, catches breeze and diffuses the problem of gravity into a controlled drift. The little flyer lands in a neat crouch and folds the night around itself like a cloak. In a moment it will test a cone for seeds or peel back a scale of bark in search of articulate snacks. Gliding is not an announcement here. It is a method, learnt again and again by those who find that distance and safety are often two names for the same thing. Water keeps a separate set of hours, along a narrow channel, where roots drink from a slow sheet between floods. A low ripple against the current betrays a swimmer that is not a fish. The fur lies tight as wet silk. The tail, broader than its cousins on land, sculls with economy. On a half-submerged log, the animal pauses, shakes off the small cold it does not quite feel, and tests the bark with snout and hand. In some Jurassic basins, the night includes such semi-aquatic experimenters, mammalkin, that hunt for invertebrates in the soft, silent silt, then climb out to groom and rest in damp privacy. Their ankle bones and vertebrae will one day tell us this story, when found in river clay, turned to stone. Above and around, insects write the atmosphere's cursive. Beetles, numerous beyond reckoning, patrol every texture, underleaf, bark, rotting wood, damp soil, with persistence that defines the word. Crickets tune the evening. Mayflies, brief and luminescent in purpose, if not in literal light, cast off their larval months for a few hours of airborne poetry. Dragonflies own the last lanes of dusk, and patrol the first lanes of dawn, making exact loops over black water. Termites, social experiments in cellulose, nibble at fallen wood, and return it to soil in fine, tan granules, turning trunks into nectar for roots. Somewhere, perhaps, a moth explores the fragrance of a cycad cone, as beetles do, drawn by old bargains that predate petals. The forest reads all this as a practical gift. Waste made food, fuel made breath. Wood returned to a grammar roots can understand. Small reptiles share the paths. Lizards that move like braided shadows, little crocodilomorphs threading quiet margins toward pools that promise fish and frogs. Amphibians contribute soft vowels to the soundscape. A turtle sighs at the edge of a sandbar, and decides that today is not a day for risk. Eyeshine glows now and again from a low branch, a pair of points, then nothing. The night may be ancient for mammals because day belonged so often to giants. Some researchers suggest a nocturnal bottleneck, a long apprenticeship in darkness where small ancestry learned to refine smell and hearing, while the sun was the province of huge herbivores, and the hunters who weighed their options over long distances. The rocks do not give us schedules, only bodies with features that hint, large orbits in skulls, earbones delicate as jewelry, limbs tuned for quiet power. Perhaps night offered shelter from eyes that measured the world in horizons, not in inches. Perhaps the cool allowed warm running engines to idle without overheating. Perhaps the undergrowth pantry simply opens best after dusk. We step into chronology as easily as into shadow. Early in the Jurassic, mammal-like relatives, nimble herbivores and omnivores not quite inside the crown group, still share the ground, some chewing seeds with remarkable battery teeth, others digging like professionals. Through the Middle Jurassic, true mammals diversify in design, small but inventive, some with teeth made for crushing beetle shells, some with long fingers suited to bark peeling, some with forelimbs robust enough for burying, some with membranes that turn a fall into a commute. Toward the late Jurassic, lineages that will thread into our later story, tiny relatives of the branch that will one day include placentals, cousins edging toward monotreme-like solutions, put down their quiet flags in silt that will harden into stone, so gentle you can still see the nap of preserved fur. Meanwhile, mammal jaws perfect their single-bone elegance. Ear bones settle into their inner sanctum. Growth rings in teeth tell of seasons survived on calendars older than any map. Evidence arrives not just as skeletons but as whispers. Tiny tracks cross a damp bed of silt and vanish into a smear where a tail brushed or a body sat to chew. A burrow's roof collapses and yields a curl of backbone and a small skull that, when cleaned from rock, shows nerves and vessels traced in mineral filigree. A thin slab in a quarry far away and long ago opens like a book, and on one page a fur imprint blooms around a form poised as if between breaths. In the same beds, the soft-bodied insect preserves its wings like lace, and the day the quarry worker pries it free, a moth in the present flutters by, unaware of the mirror. Food webs here are made of patience. A fallen cone becomes a festival. Seeds for mammals and beetles, scales for mites, shelter for larval things that will, in some weeks, try wings. Fungi invade and turn wood into sponge. In doing so, they release the last sugars for those small mouths that can find them. A dead fish washed up by a retreating flood feeds flies in short, glittering shifts. Then a small jaw plucks the flies, then something else memorizes the small jaw. Nothing is wasted long. The night's economy is efficient, because the margins between full and empty are narrow here, and those who live in margins are interesting in their solutions. Let's move with a single animal for a while. It keeps to a run of shadow along the base of a stand of horsetails, slips under a curtain of fern, and pauses at a lump of rotting wood. The nose maps it, the hand confirms. A forefoot digs, a few deft scrapes, and a tunnel opens onto pale grubs arranged like commas. The head lowers, the teeth work, the eye half closes in a private satisfaction. A rustle follows from the far side. The animal freezes, every hair a sensor, and then flows backward into shadow with an efficiency learned slowly and remembered always. A ground-hunting lizard slips into the grub room 30 seconds later and finds it already emptied. No disappointment here, just the next page turn. The lizard moves on, the mammal moves on. The wood continues its gentle declaration of softness. Above, a branch carries a different drama. A small, feathered night customer, neither fully bird as we know it, nor the older style of flyer, makes a short, precise hop, takes 3 deliberate pecks at bark and plucks a spider from between scales. In its paws it watches the ground the way water watches a leaf. If we could see through leaves to the sky, we'd watch a pterosaur slide silently along the dark edge where sea breeze meets woodland air, following a line it found at sunset, and will trace again at dawn. Night is not an end, only a shift. We bring in uncertainty with our usual tenderness. Did early mammals all live by night? Likely not. Mostly might be the better word, with species occupying crepuscular bridges, and in some safe rooms of the world, daring daylight under brush and thorn. Were gliders common, or occasional marvels? The record suggests they were special, but not singular enough to show the idea had been tested more than once. Did fur already come in the palettes we know, striped, barred, dappled? Pigment rarely confesses. Patterns hide from stone. But where we find melanosomes, the tiny bodies that carry color, some fossils hint at browns and blacks, at countershades that soften the outline against leaf and shadow. We keep our voice low and use words like perhaps, because the night is honest and asks the same of us. There is a kindness in noticing how these small lives connect the entire day. What wakes after dusk, cleans the plate for morning, tucks nutrients into soil for roots to meet at noon, prunes back the ambitions of insects that might otherwise make lace of every green surface by late afternoon. By chewing, burrowing, dragging, caching, they rearrange the ground into places where water can soak and seeds can catch. They are gardeners who never apply for credit. Parallels to us arrive quietly. Our own history was long a study in edges, sleeping in hollows, foraging when bright eyes slept, listening harder than we looked. We keep the habits, the relationship with fire, the taste for stored seeds, the comfort taken in small rooms we can defend with hands. The miniature burrow with 2 doors is a cousin to the back entrance that lets us slip home unnoticed. The pantry tunnel is our larder. The gliding membrane is our shortcut across a city when we memorize the alleyways that keep us safe. We did not inherit these exact bodies, but perhaps we inherited their attentiveness to small advantages, their devotion to roots, their love of warmth. Through the late Jurassic, continents lean farther from their old union, and new coastlines voltage the climate with alternating wet and dry. The night leaves keep pace. Populations rise when the rains are generous, and seeds lay thick under conifers. They thin in hard years, and tuck their small hopes deeper into roots and hollow logs. New predators learn their patterns, small, swift theropods that move with needle feet through fern and horsetail, long-snouted crocodilomorphs that hunt the shallows in the moon's incomplete light. And the mammals adjust, making maps that avoid those places at those hours. Evolution in this size class is nimble. A cusp on a tooth shifts. A finger lengthens by a hair. A retina leans toward rod from cone. And a lineage inherits a new permission. By midnight, the forest has become companionable. The first cool finds your skin through the blanket of evening. Somewhere, resin beads on bark harden a little more. A cone falls soft, precise, and rolls into a position a small jaw will find perfect just before dawn. On the floodplain, the river is a very slow thought. Its surface collects the reflected stride of stars and offers it back to anybody willing to watch. We might widen the view one last time, across this continent, and across the others, stepping aside in slow degrees. These night lives repeat in countless variations. In uplands where wind keeps scents honest, in swamp edge where the ground is a sponge, in coastal thickets that smell of salt and resin, in rift valleys, laced with lakes that breathe fog at dusk. The names we could give, some famous, some still known only to a stone layer in a single hill, are less important than the continuity eyes in the dark, hands testing bark, teeth tuned for a particular task, hearts that run warm enough to make night a friend. To close, come back to that first whiskered face, paused at the bend in a route. It takes 3 tiny steps, stops, turns a half circle, and fits itself into a hollow that had been keeping this exact shape in mind all day. The body unwinds an increment, the breath steadies, in out, almost too small to see. In the little room, warmth gathers like a kind idea. Outside, a cricket adjusts its note. A fern unhooks the last drop of water from its tip, and lets it join the soil with a sound too quiet to have a word. Rest here with them. In the undergrowth, in the modest heat of a burrow, in the idea that small can be sovereign, night is not empty. It is exact. And somewhere in its patient arithmetic, a future is being written in teeth and habits, in quiet, clever roots between roots. We may never know every path, but the dark remembers for us. Let the lids grow heavy. Let the body read the cool of air, the way these little ones rid a twig's tremor. The chapter turns itself down, small, quick, clever, until only the rhythm remains. Begin with a shoreline that seems familiar, and isn't. The tide slides over pale flats, then hesitates, as if tasting a new contour. Wind arrives from a direction the reeds have only recently learned to accept. In the middle distance, an island that was once a peninsula practices the art of being separate. The map has not leapt, it has exhaled. Still, the edges know. Late Jurassic light has a slightly different angle to it, more water to scatter through, more warm air to paint with. The Atlantic's young seam widens by inches in a year that feels like forever, and yet is only today repeated. The Tethys breathes like a long hallway in summer, ferrying heat, salt, and possibilities. Along the margins of Gondwana, rifts play at being oceans, then commit to the north. Mountains lift a little higher in places where plates have met and refuse to pass. New ridgelines that edit wind and invite rain to pause, empty, and begin again on the other side. Climate listens, adjusts its chords, and hums a changed refrain. You might not notice if you were a conifer drinking fog on a hilltop. You would notice if you were a fish reading currents along a shelf, or a pterosaur tracing thermals that now take a kinder bend. And if you walked floodplains where herds write mourning into mud, you would notice that some feet still come, some come less often, and a few new steps, lighter, perhaps quicker, begin to appear along the softer edges of the path. We move past familiar company and greet them as they pass. Sauropods still turn rivers into measured sentences, great commas of shade under the noon. Stegosaurs keep their leafwork honest along bars of willow and fern, plates catching light like a polite announcement that says only, "I am here." Hunters shadow the margins with the economy of experience, long arms and eyes that know how to read distance in grass. And yet, beneath this steadiness a quiet reshuffling begins. Ankylosaurian forms, low and careful, the language of armor, taking on new dialects, test the brows under open pines. Small, nimble, coelurosaurs, relatives of futures we will come to know better, write quick handwriting across driftwood and dune. The big allosaur kin still claim their lanes, but new accents join the chorus. Change is not a parade, it is an undercurrent. In the forests, the green remains loyally Jurassic. Conifers in many styles, cycads dignified as ever, ginkgos passing light from hand to hand through fans of living paper. Bennettitellins still craft their intricate, almost flower architectures, a rehearsal in scent and form that suggests conversations with insects were already deep and old. And yet, if we hold pollen under a microscope in certain beds near the boundary of ages, a whisper appears. Grains that some will argue foreshadow a new botanical grammar. Perhaps the first true flowers are not here yet, not in the sense that would fill meadows with color. Perhaps the invitations are being written in smaller rooms by fewer hands. The future's envelope is addressed, sealed with resin, and set aside. The courier has not. Oceans tell their own version. Reefs, rebuilt with patience after ancient troubles, throw bright rings around lagoons where the finest sediments fall, and keep secrets with uncommon kindness. Ichthyosaurs still carve the blue with crescent tails, though some lineages are past their peak, the baton passing in slow, respectful arcs to plesiosaurs that perfect the four-paddle stroke into artistry. Farther from shore, chalk makers, tiny plates spinning sun into shield, multiply, writing whiteness into futures that will stand as cliffs. In certain basins, depth leans oxygen poor at intervals. Black shells take the minutes, binding them into sheets that smell of ink when a stone is freshly split. Living through such moods is a practice of edges. Hug the shelf, keep to currents that feel alive, enter the green where light and breath keep their meeting. On land, another edge is practice, where young deserts peer through from behind their curtains. Not the global, stern rooms of earlier eras, but local experiments, rain shadows tucked behind newly lifted ranges. Continental interiors that spend longer under blue and wait more earnestly for the season to turn. Plants there are bolder about water and thrift. Animals know the morning better than the afternoon. Nights are lived by those who have invested in the quiet industry of fur, or in the careful accounting of water and heat. The monsoon still arrives in many places with its travelling palaces of cloud and thunder. In others, the interval between palaces lengthens. A leaf's margin answers by thickening. A root decides to go deep. We linger at one of the famous rooms where the late Jurassic has left a window ajar. The lagoon-bound archipelago of stone flats and gentle salty ponds lies inland of a reef, protected from firth by a necklace of islands. In this quiet, close-air world, fine-lime mud settles like dust on a shelf. When a fish flips at the surface, the circle it draws on the film becomes a brushstroke in rock. When a dragonfly fails and lands, its glasswork prints. When a small, feathered creature flutters to water's edge and leaves the memory of veins and barbs behind, the page takes the impression, closes, and waits for millions of years. We lift that page now and call the images by names, but the sea remembers them as afternoon. Elsewhere, on a continent that will, in a new age, be called by a name that includes America, rivers we have walked before begin to braid a slightly different way. Coarse and fine trade places in the stack. New uplifts to the west send grains with a different signature into channels that shift a strong shoulder here, a lazy elbow there. The famous floodplain communities continue, but their coda approaches. No tragedy, only a transition into a suite of sediments and stories that belongs more to the age ahead than the age behind. In the rock column it is a line you can walk with your finger. On the day itself, it is 100 small choices made by water and wind, over and over, until the sum acquires a name. We could talk of turnovers and counts, this family thinning, that one diversifying, but the evening suggests a gentler frame. Imagine an edge where two colors meet and feather into each other, so finely you cannot say where one ends. That is how the Jurassic leans into the Cretaceous. The calendar will place the boundary at about 145 million years before our present hour, give or take the patience of different rocks. But animals and plants did not wake that morning to find new instructions on their leaves. They continued, and in continuing became slightly other. The late-stepping stegosaurs will have fewer descendants in the chapters to come. The armored, low-slung keepers will edit their blueprints toward new emphasis. The precise-toothed small hunters will practice behaviors that, when feathers thicken and bones lighten further, will feel strangely familiar. The world hums the same key, then adds instrument. If you like, hold a single tooth in your imagination. A shark's shed and found on a shelf far from any boat. A small triangle, the color of smoke. In earlier beds, the shape is this. In younger beds, it becomes that, edges changing by millimeters, serrations deepening or softening, a signature evolving as prey and pursuit fine-tune each other's sentences. Such tiny edits multiplied by seas and seasons write entire libraries of difference without ever raising their voice. Our uncertainties remain our companions, kindly and alert. How near to the boundary does the earliest truly flowering plant root itself? Some pollen says one thing, some fossils of leaves another. The chorus asks us to listen without insisting on a single soloist. How gentle or sharp was the rebalancing of ocean breath at depth, in particular basins? The shells testify where they exist, where erosion has eaten the page. We infer from neighbors and keep our guesses provisional. Did certain dinosaur lineages decline because of climate's tilt, competition's pressure, or the quiet march of chance? The rocks permit all three actors on the stage and suggest that the play was collaborative. If the scale begins to press, return to the human-sized echo. We know edges of change intimately. We wake one morning and the street's shade falls differently because a tree has been pruned. We drive home by a route whose timing is altered by a new light. A friend's laugh carries a note we haven't heard before. None of these is a boundary. Together they are the boundary. In our own lives we seldom cross a line. We traverse a field where the grass changes variety underfoot. The late Jurassic is such a field, warm, generous, familiar. And then over a low rise, the scent of the air includes a new sweetness we cannot yet name. Evenings on the edges are particularly kind. A pterosaur rides the last sea wind to a ledge that has only recently become a cliff, rising where subsidence and sediment have negotiated a new coastal profile. A small, feathered flyer takes a straightening breath before leaping branch to branch in a practice that will, a little later in Earth's story, become as common as leaves. In the dark under a cycad, a whiskered creature memorizes a route with the solemnity of ritual and inherits, without knowing, a future that will change the planet in ways no sauropod ever imagined. We can sketch a quiet chronology before the light goes. Early, late Jurassic, seas high. Shelves generous, trackways busy on floodplains where rivers keep the rules they've liked for ages. Middle late Jurassic, carbonate platforms grow like slow, white cities. Archipelagos of low islands turn lagoons into studios where the fine-grained world records its smallest actors. Very late Jurassic, some maps lean closer to their younger versions. Fauna shuffle toward new compositions. Chalk begins to outline the work it will finish later. A boundary approaches that will separate chapters without scolding either one. You could sleep through it and wake in the Cretaceous having missed no alarm. Let's close with a simple doorstep. A strip of wet sand between a lagoon and the low brush. The air holds the mineral sweetness of evening. A stegosaur has passed, not long ago. Its tail left a note in the sand. Then the next small wave erased only half of it. A lighter set of prints crosses at an angle, three-toed and precise. A small hunter on its useful errands, and between those, a seam of near-weightless dots, the footsteps of a very small mammal, almost stitched rather than pressed, as if a needle had walked the shore. The last wave of the flood comes and stops just short of them, leaving a glassy line. In another hour, wind will soften everything until only the idea remains. In another world, the sand will be stone, and someone will run a fingertip along the record and feel, past knowledge, a kind of affection. Edges of change are where sleep likes to find us, between shapes, in the mixed light, with both arms open. The past chapter's warmth lingers. The next chapter's scent is already here. Just enough to be interesting. Nothing urgent. Nothing lost. Only the soft turning of a page. Let your breath follow that turning in and out, as the Jurassic leans kindly toward what comes next. Begin with dust that hangs in a sunbeam. A quiet quarry morning, limestone opening along a pale seam the way a book opens in careful hands. The first tap is light, then lighter, then a sigh, and the slab lifts to reveal a page the world has not seen since a lagoon forgot its own surface. On that page, the hush of a feather, each barb drawn in mineral pencil, the ripple of water frozen into shallow curves, a small fish printed as if it decided to be an illustration instead of a life. You and I lean closer without meaning to. The air smells faintly of wet chalk and time. Stones keep company with time differently than we do. They don't remember the way we remember. Images, voices, a calendar hung on a kitchen wall. They endure. And in enduring, they trap a little motion, a little breath, a little rumor of rain. The Jurassic left many such pages tucked into shelves around the planet. And tonight we read a few by lamplight, turning them with the tenderness reserved for albums and lullabies. This pale quarry belongs to an ancient archipelago of lagoons. Its muds were fine as flour, its waters often still, and when wind failed and oxygen thinned, the bottom became a vault. What settled there, winds, leaves, the odd, exquisite accident escaped the teeth of scavengers and the edits of current. Later, when pressure and patience turned that mud to paperstone, the vault opened to whoever would tap, lift and listen. We call it Solnhofen today, a name shaped by German vowels, but in the hours we are visiting, it is simply a quiet basin, behind a reef, a still room where the air once itself was heavy with summer, far away in both space and texture. Another archive lies under wide western skies, shales and sandstones stack in colors you can taste. Olive, bone, cinnamon, a wet grey-green that smells of river. Here, channels wandered across floodplains and left their bones behind. Gravel tongues from floods, fine silts from lazy months, ash layers, thin as a sigh from distant volcanoes, writing dates in their own script. In those beds the remains of giants paused their journey from flesh to soil. Water rolled heavy bones into bars and let them rest. Mud tucked lighter ribs away in backwaters. A half-buried skeleton sat through a dry season and caught a dusting of wind-blown sand before the next monsoon sealed it in. The record is not a tidy museum. It is a pantry of chance. We call this province the Morrison Formation now, and it feels like a library built by a river that loved stories, but had no interest in alphabetizing them. Across the seas, another shelf kept its own minutes. The Oxford clay in a future England was once the floor of a warm, shallow sea. When you split its dark stone, the room fills with a scent like old ink and rain. Inside, marine reptiles unfurl from the rock. Ichthyosaurs with their lantern eyes, plesiosaurs with paddles mid-stroke, alongside ammonites that carry geometry like a prayer. This sea was a world of coils and hunters, of silt that fell in a patient snow. Every slab reads like a page taken directly from water, and there are more. Tendaguru Hill, in what will be Tanzania, where rocks lean out of the ground as if to offer their contents to daylight. Lufeng, in Yunnan, a storybook of early limbs and teeth. The Karoo, the Blue Lies, sandstone ledges in Patagonia that hold the punctuation of tracks, each place a dialect of the same language. Whisper, layer, endure. Bones are one way the past speaks. Footprints are another, and sometimes they speak more clearly. On a flat of sandstone where a river once slowed itself into thought, the ground hardened just enough before the flood returned. A sauropod passed, left, right, left, each print a bowl that filled with sky. A stegosaur wrote its measured sweep across a bar and lifted its tail just there, leaving the lightest of commas. Tiny three-toed steps, stitched between the larger notes like grace marks in a score. The flood came, laid a thin sheet of silt across all of it, and withdrew. Sun baked the page. Repeat, repeat, for days, for a week, for a season. Then the path buried and carried into stone. When a modern boot sole rests beside those prints, the distance collapses for a breath. You know the weight of an animal you will never meet by the way the rock sighs where it stood. Not every echo is beautiful in the way we expect. In a drawer in a small museum, someone opens a box and reveals a rounded, textured stone cut in half and polished. It is brown. In cross-section it holds flecks and fibers. A kind of confetti. It is a coprolite fossilized dung, and it is quietly thrilling. Under a lens, the flecks resolve into plant bits and cuticle fragments, seeds, the shell of a beetle. You can know what moved through a belly on a day 50 million years ago, whether the meal was fern or fish, whether the herbivore chewed its food thoroughly or behaved like a hurried guest. It is, if you're willing, a small poem about the ordinary. Amber offers a different intimacy. A bead of resin once ran down the bark of a conifer and caught an air bubble, a mite, a pollen grain, a wing with the world's tiniest gears. Over time, the bead hardened, buried with needles and cones in a litter that became its own sediment, then lifted again into human light by erosion's unwrapping hands. You hold it, and inside a droplet of the Jurassic air remembers the pressure of a summer noon. In some pieces, a beetle is preserved with its colors intact. In others, a spider stretches across a scene like a lyre. The chemistry is a lullaby all its own, pine breath turned to stone, scent folded into a translucent sleep. We rid climate from clues most would pass without noticing. The number and size of leaf pores etched into a fossil ginkgo fan indicate how often the plant traded water for breath, and by inference how rich the air was in the carbon of its day. The ratio of oxygen isotopes in the shells of tiny marine drifters whispers the temperature of the water they grew in, season by season. Ancient soils show horizons and nodules where roots and rain once met. Their colors and clays a record of wet and dry, of patience and flood. Even the planet's magnetic field, which flips now and then like a coin, leaves its heads-tails sequence in iron minerals. As they cooled, those flips become a barcode we can scan to place a rock in the long hallway of time. One could get lost in the technique, but the feeling beneath it is simple. The world leaves breadcrumbs, and patiently, we follow. People, of course, are part of this story too, not as protagonists of the Jurassic, but as its gentle translators. In a field tent, bright with noon, someone labels a bag of bone fragments with a pencil, their handwriting steady, their lunch forgotten and warm. In a prep lab, a brush the size of a finch's wing coaxes a rib from stone grain by grain, while a radio murmurs the day's weather to a room that does not mind. In a museum after hours, the echo of footsteps is a little shy. The skeletons do not move, but the shadows do, and a night guard pauses longer than he means to beneath a long cathedral ribcage. Quarries close and open again, papers are argued with kindness. A child presses a palm to glass and measures her hand against a claw, the way we all do, as if to compare two kinds of time. We should admit the draft marks in the margin. Fossils are capricious archivists. They keep what conditions allow. Entire biomes vanish because their plants were ready to rot, and their animals did not die in places that favor memory. Some regions are overrepresented because their geology is generous and their outcrops accessible to boots. Others speak seldom, then suddenly, with a hillside single sentence that asks us to revise a chapter's worth of confident prose. Names change, identities merge or split. A bone once thought to belong to a hunter finds a better home in a plant-eater's architecture, after someone notices a muscle scar in the wrong place. Science at its most charming writes in pencil. Chronology, too, is written on many scales. In one, we chart ammonite coils through layers like beads through time, and use their predictable fashions to date a cliff from bottom to top. In another, we count layers where a lake breathed summer and winter into alternating sheets. Light, dark, and arrive at years the way you would count rings in a tree. In the boundary between ages, volcanic ash gives us a chance to borrow uranium's very slow clock, reading the isotopic ratios in tiny zircon crystals to calibrate an entire planet's calendar. These methods are not competitors. They are companions who check each other's work and offer us together a confidence that feels almost tender. What, then, was Earth like during the Jurassic? After these chapters, perhaps the answer is less a list and more a room. Warm, often humid, sometimes seasonally dramatic. Ice, if any, a rumor on local heights. Continents easing apart, seasoning the air with new coasts and winds. Seas shallow and sunlit on broad shelves. Deeper waters sometimes breathless, leaving ink-dark pages for future fingers. Forests dignified, conifers, cycads, ginkgo, breathing resin, and rain, building with patience. Rivers generous and restless. Floodplains stitched with oxbows where giants came to drink. Skies written by membrane and feather. Nights owned by small, quick, clever lives. And everywhere, the slow work of breath. Volcanoes exhaling, rocks weathering, oceans sifting light into limestone. the planet adjusting its thermostat with the unruffled composure of an old house. We return, gently, to our own hour. In a museum case, Solnhofen's feather glows under soft light. In a desert, a footprint fills with a puddle, after a very brief rain, and a lark lands at its rim to drink, an echo on top of an echo. On a cliff that used to be a reef, chalk releases white onto a tourist's fingers, who laughs and rubs it away, unaware she is smudged with the powders of 1,000,000 sunlit cells that fell through a Jurassic sea. In a city far inland, a child falls asleep with a plastic sauropod in one hand and a flashlight in the other, as if to say that light and patience are both necessary to find what you love. If you listen closely in a quiet room, you can sometimes hear a fossil speak, not in words, more in the way the air feels when you open a window, and a weather you can't see touches your wrist. A stone on a shelf holds a day when a dragonfly failed and became a message. A pebble in your pocket might once have been ooze that knew the weight of monsoon. The world is full of such small, patient inheritances. Let the chapter close the way. A field day does, boots untied, lips tasting a little salt, pockets a little heavier with ordinary rocks that felt like friends. Outside, a breeze moves through leaves that are not ginkgo, but know how to be leaves. The night beyond the window is the color of old shale, and the first star has the shy brightness of quartz. Somewhere rain considers a far hill. Somewhere else, a ridge breathes heat into a winter sea. The archives are safe in their stone rooms. They do not need us to stand guard. They will wait. For you, the waiting can end. Let the shoulders settle, the jaw unclench. Let the long spine of the sauropod you met by the river become the comfortable length of your own back against the mattress. Let the reef's soft crackle turn into the house's small night sounds. Let the feather in stone become the whisper of your breath. In and out, in and out. If you're still awake, you can carry one image with you as you go, a clear footprint, filled with evening sky, holding a few stars like seeds. The tide will lift it in time. The stone will keep a version. Your memory will keep another. All three are true enough. Good night, traveler. The Jurassic is still out there, bound in cliffs and meadows and the bones of hills. It was warm. It was generous. It was patient. And somewhere in its long green hush, sleep has been waiting for you exactly here.